All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Great to have you here for this fireside chat with two great authors of the book "Security in the Age in the Cyber Age," and it's an introduction to policy and technology. And the privilege of knowing both of the authors, especially John Savage, for many years now, and I was thrilled when they talked to me about the book, wrote the book, and I had a chance to read the book, and it was very impressive. I say a really important body of work for both those who, like myself, have studied or been involved in cybersecurity for many years, and then those who are being perhaps introduced to it for the first time. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jim Langevin. I was the former the congressman from the 2nd Congressional District in Rhode Island. Left office on my own terms, both undefeated and unindicted, which is a good thing these days, this day and age. But during my time in Congress, I spent a lot of time focused on cybersecurity, having co-founded and co-chaired the Cybersecurity Caucus, and also part of the Cyberspace Commission, which was a 14-member commission made up of cyber experts, and produced a body of work from there that gave recommendations on how to better protect the country against cyber attacks of significant consequence. So the book "Security in the Cyber Age" really helps one to get a full understanding of both the cyber threat landscape, the technology going back both from how the computer was developed, its uses, and all the way up through to talking about artificial intelligence and how that's going to impact our world and everything in between, including the cyber threats and challenges that we face as a country on a daily basis, both in government, military, and in the private sector, and especially in the private sector critical infrastructure, which especially where in many ways most of the threats could come, because it could cripple our economy and even potentially cause loss of life, depending on the type of cyber attack that were to occur. So I'm thrilled that we're here with the authors to talk about the book and how it came to be and where we go from here. But there's a lot to learn here, and I highly recommend it. So welcome, and I'll turn it now over to David.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dave Polatty. Like Jim, I'm a senior fellow here at the Watson Institute, and when I'm not teaching classes on humanitarian issues, I'm actually engaging with humanitarian and development organizations around the world. So I have a particular interest in the impact of cybersecurity on humanitarian development and climate adaptation work. And I'm really honored to have the opportunity to have this discussion with both of these gentlemen today. I'm sure you saw their bios, and I will give you a short version, but I want to highlight the interdisciplinary nature of this collaboration, and then they'll probably get into more detail on it. John Savage is the on-wing professor of emeritus of computer science here at Brown University. I'll let him tell you how long he's been affiliated with Brown. I will not do that to him. He's also a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the Association of Computing Machinery, and the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, and a Guggenheim Fellow. He served as a Jefferson Science Fellow in the U.S. State Department. He was a fellow at East West Institute and a member of the Rhode Island Cybersecurity Commission. He's published over 100 research articles that are extremely high impact, 2 books on theoretical computer science. He's co-authored a book on computer literacy and co-edited a book on VLSI, which I had to go look up, even though I should have known. That's very large-scale integration in parallel systems. And he's given more than 185 presentations around the world on these important topics. He's joined by my colleague and friend who I spent 15 years at the Naval War College with, Derek Reveron. Derek is the chair of the National Security Affairs Department down in Newport, one of our partner institutions. And important to note that he also holds a couple different affiliations with Harvard. He's a faculty affiliate at the Belfer Center at the Kennedy School, and then he's also a professor within the Extension School at Harvard. He specializes in strategy development, non-state security challenges, and U.S. defense policy, but I promise you there's a lot more there he doesn't put into his bio. And then he also served on the Rhode Island governor-appointed Cybersecurity Commission, and his published work focuses primarily on foreign policy, defense strategy, and human security. So with that, we'll go to Jim with the first question. We're going to have 6 questions from Jim and I total, and then we'll be coming to you in the audience to see what questions you'd like to ask.
Very good. David, thank you. And again, thrilled to be here with John and Derek, and I look forward to a great discussion today. They're great cyber experts, and we're in for a good program. First of all, I'd like to ask about how the idea generated and came about as to, in terms of why you wrote the book. How long did it take, first of all, because you cover a huge landscape of cyber and technology and policy, but and why did you decide to co-author this book, and what was it like working with a faculty expert from a completely different field in collaboratively researching and writing such a critical issue?
Yeah, no, great question. So you saw the head nod, so I'll start. So I assume everybody understands these are my personal views. I don't represent Department of Defense, Department of Navy, or the Naval War College. So John and I met, it was probably about a decade ago. So Governor Gina Raimondo, now our Secretary of Commerce, had pulled together people from around the state of Rhode Island to become the first cybersecurity commission in the country. And so that's where John and I met. We come from different backgrounds. I focus on national security issues. John is a computer scientist. And then, so we became friends and just looking at it, and it's hard. We always talk about things, the importance of working in teams or being interdisciplinary. But I'll say too, the structures of our modern universities really prevent that. And so we were able to overlook that. We collaborated, and it was about, I think, a little over 5 years ago now. On a Sunday afternoon, I emailed John saying, "Hey, John, it's Derek. Remember me from the Cybersecurity Commission? Do you want to write a book?" And John, without hesitation, said, "Sure." And this is pre-COVID, and I think I came up one day, and we had, I think, a long conversation up in your office in the computer science building, not too far from here, and then coffee. And then about 5 years later, we ended up with a book. And I think overall it was a good experience. I will say 5 years is longer than I was used to writing. I normally write much faster, but John made sure that we were thorough and focused, and I think as you read it, I hope you read it with one voice, because that's always one of the challenges when you write with somebody. And I think none of us, I don't think either of us took exception. I was a lead for one chapter, John would go in and edit, he was a lead for another, I would go in and edit, and we did that for a long time. In a good way, I'm glad it took us 5 years, because in the original table of contents, we did not have an artificial intelligence chapter. So thankfully, we added that about a year before ChatGPT became a household word. So we did not chase ChatGPT, but it was very much trying to look holistically.
Right. And it's been, for me, a great experience working with Derek. When I was active, I retired officially 2018, gave up my tenured slot so that it could be filled by someone else, but continued to teach for a couple more years. I find as you get older, two things that happen to you. Can't remember what they are. All right. So it's been a great project. We have compatible personalities. We have different backgrounds. Derek's is primarily as a political scientist, and when I was active at Brown, I tried to bring colleagues from political science, from economics, together with computer scientists to address the cybersecurity problem. I didn't have much success with that. But when you read this book, you'll see there is political science in here. There is economics, a little bit of it. There's international relations, of course, in here. So it's a very broad book. And the project, I found a lot of fun, hard work, but a lot of fun. And I think it's the best book that I've participated in.
Yeah, no, agree.
Yeah, it's been, it's very comprehensively done, well-written, and exciting. One follow-up, if I could, to that. Do you plan to put out an audio version? Because that's how I actually read books these days, and there was no audio version. I was disappointed. I had to do the old-fashioned way. So.
Read. So I don't know. That would be something we can think about. You know, we're primarily teachers, and so we wrote it as for students in a textbook.
Yeah.
And I think the writing style is different. And I would almost say that we would almost have to come up with like an audio version, especially with the scientific notation. I'm not sure how you, so maybe the one time, you know, we maybe had differences, and I didn't get this. I picked up on this a little bit, but I had gone in and done a global font change, not recognizing all of those notations. That wasn't a font. And so poor.
Symbolic font.
It was all symbolic font. So, you know, I changed everything to Times New Roman. And John didn't say anything, but I know he probably had to spend, you know, 3 to 5 hours redoing all the notations. So again, I apologize for that, but that was probably the one danger. So if you're, you know, if you're writing with a political scientist to the scientific people out there, make sure you put that warning on there. Don't change fonts.
Hey, for the next question, I imagine this would have come from the audience. If it didn't come from me, the pace and scale of technological change and innovation, they don't just seem, they feel a bit overwhelming at this moment in time. And so, without summarizing the entire book, what concerns you most about these recent changes and these innovations that seem to be exploding in the cyber age at large?
I'm most concerned about artificial intelligence. It's not generally known that it's really an experimental subject. The concept of a neural network, where you try to emulate the neurons in a human brain, was introduced in 1943. And the first moderately successful attempt to train the neural network was obtained around 1956, but the subject languished from 56 until the late toward the end of the last century, but it wasn't until 2012, 69 years after the concept was introduced, with a lot of experimentation in between by various researchers trying to find techniques to train these neural networks before there was a major success. Paper published, the principal author on the paper that I'm discussing is Jeffrey Hinton, who was in the news recently. But that set off a tremendous amount of activity resulting in ChatGPT. The problem with AI is that because it's experimental, as one of my colleagues here at Brown said, the science is not caught up to the experiments. That is to say, if you ask a person who trains the neural networks, if they understand why they exhibit anomalous behavior, which I'll describe to you, they say, I don't know. They can't explain it. You need, if you want to build electrical circuits, for example, today there is solid science. There is formulas, means of analysis, so you know what you're getting. But in the case of training of neural networks, that's still an open subject. So here are examples of anomalous behavior. You can train a neural network to recognize various street signs, and this has been done at Berkeley. And then after training this visual recognition system on signs, the instructor had her students put two strips of white tape and black tape on the stop sign, and then the camera was shown this sign and it classified it as a 45-mile-an-hour sign. You can see how if you were driving you're in an autonomous vehicle and this happened to you, at the intersection, instead of stopping the car, could go zooming through, and that could be to lead to a loss of life. The other recent discovery has been that, as shown by some theoretical computer scientists at the Fox conference in October 2022, they demonstrated that if you outsource the training of a neural network, that it's possible during the training process to insert a backdoor, which is undetectable, basically, and the person with the key to the backdoor can determine the outcome of this artificial neural network. You can see that this means that you have a brand new cybersecurity problem. If you're going to use in your business or in your government agency or branch of the service artificial intelligence, and you don't have the personnel to train these things, you better make sure that if you're going to use them in a high security environment, that the company or organization doing the training for you maintains at least the same standards, security standards that you do. So the problem here is that we're excited about AI. It is going to have a lot of very useful applications, but we should not let our excitement take rule. All new technologies create, not all of them, but many of them, like the automobile, the internet, airplanes, they generate enthusiasm. And we want to jump in and exploit it. We even worry that maybe if we're talking about in a defense situation, we worry the other side's going to have it before we do, and so we're going to get in there and use it. And the message here is slow down. Make sure you know what's happening. Talk to experts. Find ways of mitigating any of these effects that are undesirable. And you can do that. We've done that repeatedly.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll just add, I mean, when I thought about this question, the Czech playwright Václav Havel came to mind. And so he was the last president of Czechoslovakia, the first president of the Czech Republic, democratically elected. And so how when he talked gave an address to Congress, and he said something about when state socialism collapsed in Central and Eastern Europe, the Communist Party sort of disappeared from its ruling monopoly. He said, things have happened so fast, we have yet to be astonished. We haven't had enough time yet to be astonished of what's happened. And so I think to sort of emphasize, what John is saying, I mean, the only thing I'll say, maybe what scares me the most, I think is implicit in the question, is forgetting that all of this is a human creation. We created the internet in 1969. Humans program, humans code, right? And we are doing all of this. And so I think my biggest worry is sort of treating it as something separate rather than a tool. And I think that's something that we have control over. And I think it's getting lost because it is very, right, we pick up our devices, we're being streamed live, via YouTube. So for the 7 people maybe watching, it's remarkable. And no single person can explain how any of this is happening. And so I would just say, remember, this is all human created. That it doesn't exist without us. And so we need to keep it reined in and make sure that it's useful for humanity, for society, and for individuals, and not let it get carried away.
So for me, from a cybersecurity standpoint, I'll stay with the AI theme. I'll jump down to this just to stay with this. It's been said that the high percentage that AI will do a lot of really good things, and a low percentage that it's going to do a lot of really bad things.
Yeah.
So in cybersecurity, how will AI make cybersecurity better and more effective? And how, though, will AI, or could it, make cybersecurity weaker and vulnerabilities exploited?
Well, it can make ChatGPT, as we know, you start with a prompt and it gives you a response that looked like it was written by a human. As you know, there are lots of social engineering attacks. This is where an individual, an attacker wants to get access to knowledge that you have or resources that you have at your disposal. And they do that by trying to mislead you, trick you, alarm you, get to respond. But often you can tell by the poor language that's used in these social engineering attacks that it's not necessarily somebody who's friendly. But with ChatGPT now, this problem for them goes away. They can now produce very high-quality text. On the defensive side, you can ask, well, what can AI do to help us do a better job at defending? As I was writing this book, I found a paper written by a couple of authors at Georgetown University who seemed to be very expert in security, and they wrote about AI. And they said they observed that artificial intelligence, of the old variety, not machine learning, but other techniques, just scanning files, looking for strings that occur in malware but generally don't occur in normal software. They said that some of these early techniques are still being deployed, but they asserted that using machine learning, modern machine learning, is unlikely to make a big contribution to AI unless there are major advances. Now, having said that, both Kaspersky, the Russian-based, originally at least, Russian-based cybersecurity company, and CrowdStrike, an American company, both have reported that they are using artificial intelligence. What they do is that they put an implant, a little piece of software, into an operating system. Whenever a program that's running wants to do something that involves resources that may not belong to the program that's running, what the operating system does, it gets involved. And so the implant starts reporting all the calls that are being made to it. Those are sent by these two companies to a cloud, and they're analyzed for the behavior, so you can try to identify something that looks malicious. It remains an open question, I think, is how much progress is going to be made with machine learning.
And I like, to frame it, to sort of pick on Jim's point is, there tend to be boomers and doomers when it comes to probably most things, but including AI. And so the boomers are AI is going to revolutionize everything from student paper writing to back office management to help us with our budget problems and you name it. And then the doomers are sort of driven, and I have to credit my friend Brandon Valeriano. He sort of, and I think I know the answer to this question. Star Wars or Star Trek?
My preference?
Yeah, I think I know the answer.
Star Wars, of course.
Okay, so this is.
I believe you asked that, to be honest.
Yeah, I know this, but I'll give Brandon credit. So I think that the doomers tend to sort of, like the boomer and doomer discussion, it tends to be this, so if it's Star Wars, it's C-3PO. It is this assistant that will help us make decisions, give us lots of information, some useless, some unnecessary, but it's still the human in charge. And then the doomers sort of have the Terminator. And the technology is neutral. Whether we get C-3PO, so if you're Star Trek, it was going to be Commander Data. But it's humans who determine whether we invent C-3PO or the Terminator. And so, again, I think we always have to kind of come back to this idea that technology is a tool, and we're the tool-making species, though I know there's other species now that use tools. But we have to kind of keep hold of that idea and not let it get away from us.
And when writing the book, Derek pointed out to me the picnic principle. Problem in chair, not computer.
Yeah, the problem in chair, not computer, not in keyboard. It's us. It's all of the good and all the bad in society just gets projected into cyberspace. So whether it's ransomware is just a new form of armed bank robbery. Yeah. Influence operations is just a cheaper propaganda. Privacy compromise is just a new form of blackmail. In many respects. And so we haven't really caught up with that. Again, going back to the hovel, right? We haven't had enough time yet to sort of be astonished in what we have.
Our chapter 4 is entitled The Human Dimension.
Human dimension, yeah.
And the reason for it is because we both believe that the human dimension is very important. And we humans the economists used to tell us some while back, several decades ago, that humans are rational. We make rational decisions. You define what's called a utility function, you maximize the utility function, and you know what a human's going to do. Along came two Israeli psychologists, Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, and they taught the world that we are not rational all the time. We are subject to cognitive biases. These are tendencies that we exhibit, and this happens even amongst people who've been trained to recognize that cognitive biases exist. And then another topic we cover in this book, is in the last chapter. We say it's on leadership, but in fact, it's all about what is called super forecasting. Philip Tetloff at the University of Pennsylvania wanted to know, and others too, but he wrote, he's the author of this book. It's called Super Forecasting, that we summarize in this chapter. What is it? Well, we humans are constantly making decisions, exercising judgment. And what he wanted to know was, are there some people who, given a question such as, we are, it was January 21 when Putin was threatening to invade Ukraine. The question could be, is Putin likely to invade by February 15th of that year? You can see that this is a tough question, but some people are very good at sussing out what might affect decision-making, and that's another aspect of human nature.
And it's about being in teams. I mean, the study is fascinating because it also shows the limit of expertise, that experts tend to want to double down on their conclusions and not be open. And so by having teams and then even, we challenged each other throughout, just two people writing a book. But I mean, that's right. I mean, again, I know it's said frequently, but it is about being interdisciplinary. It's about a team sport. It is about diversity and ensuring having different perspectives across the board to just getting better decisions.
Yeah, if you'd be willing, just for a few minutes, to focus on the international aspects of cybersecurity. The book clearly points out that cyberspace is a global phenomenon, but how different actors approach the opportunities, the benefits, and also the risks is quite different. So if you would talk to us about the particular international component and the risks and challenges, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, so I guess my answer will be sponsored by the letter B. And I'll sort of take the perspective of Beijing as an archetype, Brussels an archetype, and then business, because Washington doesn't start with B. But at least from there are different international perspectives on cyberspace. And so, for example, if you're sitting in Beijing, you largely see most things from the lens of ensuring the continued political monopoly of the Chinese Communist Party. And so you view free speech, anonymity, dissent as a threat to political rule. And so, and you see the notion of sovereignty, both physical and digital. And so Beijing looks to sort of erect digital borders in cyberspace and through various technical means. There's a great firewall, VPN use, which is a virtual private network that we talk about, is a way to be anonymous and to reroute your traffic. So if I'm sitting here in Providence, I can turn on my VPN. It looks like I'm in Charlotte, or it looks like I'm in Ottawa or something. That's illegal. It's illegal also in Moscow and also in other countries. Really government, Russia does it. Parts of India, Pakistan, Iran, North Korea do it as well. The idea that government should be in control of cyberspace to the benefit of government. The Brussels perspectives is cyberspace should be a protected space for individuals. The European Union has been developing laws and has developed laws to protect human rights in cyberspace. They highly value the role of individuals. There is a part of the 2018 law, GDPR, the right to be forgotten. So if I'm European, I don't like a search result that Google returns, I can write Google, remove that search result, protect my privacy. And that's the Brussels approach. And then in the United States, I would say it's largely the business approach. Government is largely laissez-faire. Business is protected. Section 230 of the 1996 Telecommunications Act insulates, shields businesses from what's on their network. You saw yesterday, as at least the CEO of Meta testified, and others testified before Congress. 33rd time Meta officials have testified since 2017. Zero U.S. law. Why? I think one is sort of, in general in the United States, we believe in market principles. We largely disapprove of regulation. We see cyberspace, IT companies as a source of innovation. You see American companies dominate globally, Microsoft, Cisco, Apple, and government doesn't want to hurt that. But what that does then, it exposes individuals to all of the bad exploitation either by companies or by foreign countries. And so there are very differences. I will say, if you have a chance, look up. The U.S. has an ambassador to cyberspace, Nate Fick, and he sort of eschews sort of the digital sovereignty approach that really both Beijing to the benefit of the state and Brussels to the benefit of the individual, and really calls for digital solidarity. That we're all in this together. The U.S. does have a global internet freedom agenda, where anyone everywhere should have access to the internet and information. And so there's just very different perspectives that go on, and they have not been reconciled. And then I guess my last point before John, governments are not alone in this space. So when we talk about norms, which we do in the book, Microsoft, for example, has been promoting a digital Geneva Convention to restrain governments. And there's a German company, Siemens. They make a lot of the SCADA controllers that actually manage physical movement. For example, turning valves instead of physically, but using operational technology. And Siemens is a global leader in this field, and they have their charter of trust again to constrain governments. So governments are not the only actors in this space, and in the book too we talk just about good civil society organizations in the United States and around the world that are also trying to constrain both corporations and governments. So it's a pretty full space.
Yeah. Well, however, nations need to work together, at least with nations that think alike, such as European nations and the United States, and they want to address international cybercrime. This means they have to learn to work together. The Council in Europe introduced the cyberspace, what's called the Budapest Convention, or the Cybercrime Convention, that says that if you're a signatory, you create laws, domestic laws, that are consistent with the laws that are recommended under this convention or treaty, and making it possible to extradite people, to make a request from one country to the other to hold data, because it's believed that in that other country there was a malefactor who was en route to engage in crime in your country. So there are a lot of protections like that that have been developed. What's interesting is the United Nations is now in the process of developing its own international cybercrime treaty. So we'll see where that ends. But my view on this is, when you're trying to persuade another nation that they should adhere to some norms that you think or your community thinks are desirable to have, I think you have to somehow educate them about their self-interest. Because, as you know, in this country, for example, we have copyright laws, and other countries don't. In fact, in some other countries, emulation is considered a form of flattery. And so I think that there's, again, an opportunity here for international dialogue to find common interests.
Very good. Derek, you kind of touched on my next question already, but it's an important thing to bring up again. It doesn't really take a deep dive into these topics to run across the idea that policy or laws or regulation, for that matter, have not kept up with the fast pace of technological development, and that Western governments in particular face significant challenges in responding to the risks of cyber threats while still adhering to legal frameworks. So if you could unpack that a little bit more for us and maybe explain why this issue is so tricky to navigate.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think fundamentally, and I hate to say this with, given your experience in Congress and founder of the Cyber Caucus and understand actually how legislation works or doesn't work in the process, so forgive the political scientist. Right, so I sort of start and again, I think we generally have a political culture that disfavors the national government, disfavors regulation, that we generally, we went back to the Federalist Papers, I think, on this question, because the founders thought about these things with free speech and how you protect it, free press, how you protect it. And so we did go back, and so the anti-regulatory environment, I think, has prevented a lot, or most action from Congress, no offense, because I don't know if that's right either. But, some good things I'll say Congress did in 2018, they created the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, currently headed by Jen Easterly, who is fantastic. And so, there are students here and listening. My advice as you think about careers, identify really smart, good people and go work for them. And I would say she would be one of them to go work for at CISA. And then the other good thing I think Congress did coming out of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, they created the Office of National Cyber Director. And this was in 2020. The very first one took office, Inglis, in 2021, and now it's Coker. Harry Coker is the second. And so the idea that there's a single person at the national level. So there have been some institutional things that have gone on. But I would say the national government is only part of the story. John and I met at a state level initiative, and other states followed Governor Raimondo's example in creating cyber commissions. California has a California Internet Privacy Act that is modeled after the European law, which talked about privacy and individual rights in cyberspace. So if you're Californian, you have more rights in cyberspace than if you're a Rhode Islander. Certain towns and cities around the country have banned facial recognition for use in criminal proceedings, illustrating the limits of AI. So I think, as I sort of think with, the legislation, I think is partly, the limits at the national level. Some of it's American history and culture. The government closest to the people is the best one. Some of it is the anti-regulatory feeling, largely coming out of the 1980s with deregulation. It's not to say I don't know if it's right or not. What I will say, it creates a situation where U.S. companies, universities are in a very self-help system. That we expect companies or universities or towns and cities to be able to defend themselves against foreign intelligence services. And I'm not sure how much longer that will go on. And so I think as you see, the federal government, waiting and more, the FBI, disclosed a pretty big takedown yesterday of a botnet in the United States, and they have unique authorities. So I don't know if it's a case you necessarily need new authorities, new law to do what they do. The Securities and Exchange Commission did indict the Chief Information Security Officer in the SolarWinds Corporation a few months back now, using a law from the 1930s. So I think it's a case of the executive branch perhaps using new laws, but also sort of recognizing, is it fair, is it right that Google has to defend itself against Russian intelligence? Because I'm not sure, again, I think my personal view is probably not. That we wouldn't expect, if it were a North Korean missile that destroyed Sony's data center about a decade ago, there would be no question the U.S. government would be involved. But because it was malware, there was a whole debate. was the United States attacked or not? And that's where the legal question that we try to explore in a pretty detailed way in the book is hasn't been decided. And so I think the courts will probably decide a lot of these things and give the guidance to how people behave. And we also hope, too, with ethics. You know, our AI chapter, it's called Artificial Intelligence and Ethics. And so we would like to see, right, individuals help solve this problem.
So I'll add a few comments to this. On the last topic, ethics, we met with some students before this session here, and one of the students asked basically an ethical question. What do you do if these companies are producing products that the employees don't think they should be producing? And my response was, well, you know, computer science is now teaching ethics at the undergraduate level, and I think almost every undergraduate course. That's a place to start, but there is another place to start too. A lot of people don't trust the National Security Agency because they spy, and that's suspicious, isn't it? Well, there is a person who works for the National Security Agency. His name is Rob Joyce. That's somebody I got to know. He's a very capable guy. For many years, he was the head of the Tailored Access Operations Department at the National Security Agency, and his job was to engage in foreign intelligence collection for the United States. That means they had to have all the skill sets that any good national security team had to break into computers of the most highly maintained computers in other countries. So he gave a talk in 2016 that was shocking in my view, in retrospect. And it was, he got up and he said, you know, I'm uncomfortable speaking to this open audience here. I'm paraphrasing. But he said, I'm going to give you advice on how to protect yourself from people like me. And then he proceeded to say, the single most important thing you must do in your computer network is know what software it is on it and what hardware you have. Because if you don't know it, we are going to know it more thoroughly than you do. And the second, you know, you've heard of maybe zero-day vulnerabilities. These are yet undiscovered vulnerabilities in malware. He says, we do not need to use zero-day vulnerabilities to break into computers. And then he went on to say, you know, there are steps you can take if you're running a security operations center. There are so-called reputation services that you can utilize. What do they mean? Well, you can have a reputation server that says these domain addresses are these are domain addresses used by bad guys. Okay, so if your operating system finds that some program is trying to access a site that's known to be malicious, the operating system should say, sorry, can't connect you. You know, it's like the old days where the telephone system had a person between you and the caller and the callee. There are reputation servers for code. You can, when the operating system is called by an application to open a file, the first thing you can do is you can compress that file. It's called hashing. You can send this abbreviated version, which is almost usually unique, can be sent to an application server, or maybe you buy a list of hashes from a company, and if it's, as he said, Rob Joyce said, if you find that that hash is unique, it's never been seen before, don't run the software. You know, so there are things like this that you can do. And then what happened, so he was giving public advice. And as we put in the book, he is also arranged to have a piece of software used that takes the strings of bits that constitute the machine-level program and decompile it, turn it back into a programming language. It's called GIDRA. And they made that available to the general public so that universities could use it, experiment with it, and even find if you decompile something, if it's something that's produced is something that NSA has recognized as malware and has actually made previously available, you could detect that the piece of code you're analyzing was malware. So he's making those moves. Now, the other flip side of this is NSA developed a vulnerability called Eternal Blue. And that was implicated in 2 major attacks against Microsoft. And Eternal Blue should have been kept top secret. But somehow it leaked out of NSA. So now NSA has a cyber security directive that's headed by Rob Joyce. And we have learned from the press that when they get a piece of malware that they implanted apparently in U.S. networks, which they protect, which they will give it to a site. It's called Virus Total. They publish it on Virus Total, again, to help people. Now, how far they go?
This to me is remarkable, because I remember a time where NSA stood for no such agency.
Yeah.
And so you have, the example that John had mentioned, with their kind of prime hacker going on, giving a TED Talk, and now NSA doing joint advisories, across the U.S. government, making tools available to anyone, working with partners around the world as well. It's really quite remarkable, and I think it goes, part of this digital solidarity idea that cyberspace, it's a private space, right? Private in the sense of corporation, public space, not government owned. And so if government's going to be part of the solution, they have to, declassify and work in this space. And so I think, with Rob Joyce and Jen Easterly and others, they've been, Ann Neuberger, who's at the NSE, have really focused on building partnerships with corporations.
Do you have advice for the humanitarian and development NGOs of the world, the civil society organizations?
I do. When I was in the State Department, I was there as a Justice Science Fellow in a new office, Cyber Affairs. It's a precursor to the Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Policy. And I was invited to attend a meeting with representatives from the Indian government. And so what the State Department did, the purpose of this meeting was to educate the Indian government about how the U.S. government was approaching cybersecurity. So the U.S. brought in people from Department of Commerce, the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, I think the Department of Justice Department, and I think maybe somebody from one of the intelligence agencies. But I thought it was a great illustration of how government can be helpful to another friendly government by educating in this way. In addition, I remember that the State Department was providing grants to NGOs so they could acquire communication equipment, so they could communicate between their branches securely, and even to get through the barriers that some of these autocratic countries were implementing. So they have grants that they can issue. So I would assume that if you approach Nate Fink at the Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Diplomacy, CDP, that he might be able to help.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say, be careful. As humanitarians are literally doing humanitarian work, and they want to maintain neutrality in really difficult locations. It's right. Their neutrality is they get targeted by governments that don't want to be there, groups that don't want to be there, that see them as competition. And so their cybersecurity is really, personal safety. Spyware is probably one of the more used tools that are, put on, either journalists' phones or humanitarians' phones to really spy on them directly. So I would say update software, be careful, for sure. And all the good, stuff, multi-factor authentication, update your software, but also probably recognize if they're not, they're targets. And you have to sort of probably approach security from that perspective.
And practicing the basics, right? If the advice for all of us, I would say, is practice good cyber hygiene.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we will open it up. If anybody wants to throw their hand up, I will bring a microphone to you.
the closest one. Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much again for your book. I just started reading this. I'm a student at Harvard Extension School, and my question is about Russian influence. So based on some experts' forecasts, the Russian government can partially turn off the access to the internet in Russia after presidential election in March. So how this internet isolation in Russia can influence the cyberspace in the United States? Thank you.
Yeah, so, if I fully understand the question, so if the Russian government turns off the internet, how do they influence the United States?
I mean, in general, how it can influence
Yeah.
in bad and good sides, I mean.
Yeah, so first, the influence operations don't have to be based in Russia, I guess would be the first notion. And so like the SolarWinds hack, for example, that was, it was Russian foreign intelligence, SVR, but they were using US-based servers. So that would be sort of, I guess, my short answer. And you sort of see similar things with North Korea. The ransomware operations North Korea runs, they're not running them out of North Korea. They're doing them, in Macau or Manila, someplace where they have good internet access, room service, and who knows what else. The influence operations and cyberspace operations, I would say, have become a tool of power among many governments. And so they are working feverishly to figure out how to use it. Dozens of countries have created military cyber commands to include, the United States, but it's one of dozens of countries now. And so they're just working how to figure it out. How to use it. And then likewise too, we're really sort of talking, right, terrestrial based, fiber optic cable moving data, but Starlink, is becoming more popular. Amazon has Kuiper, is another, I think it's Amazon Kuiper. And then I thought the Virgin Group was going to come up with another space-based internet sort of system that you can do this stuff from anywhere.
Вы говорите по-русски? Я не понимаю. I just said, do you speak Russian? And then when she responded in Russian, I said, I don't understand. I look at Russia as a nation that has a glorious history. Wonderful music, wonderful literature. The same is true of China. If you look at the Middle East, the Arabic nations saved all of the treasures that the Greeks produced, and we have a lot in common, don't we? We all started with the same grandmother or mother in Africa, and we spread all over the world. And I would love to see us not fighting with one another or threatening one another. I would love it that we could go back to that period when we had cultural exchanges between nations. We try to reduce tensions. The problem, however, it seems to be people. Let's come back to the earlier point. If you have dreams of recreating the Russian Empire, or if you feel like you have to compensate for a period, a century, in your country, which you refer to as a century of shame, then you find that the leaders who profess these beliefs create tensions that can lead to conflict. This is what I think we're all worried about. So if we can somehow, maybe from the people to people level, through some means, we find ways to respect, see, value our common humanity, I think we can reduce tensions.
Yeah. Unite against AI, right?
Another question.
I'm sorry, I don't.
The online can't hear you without it. So
I realize the context that we're discussing today is global security, government actions, and so on. But if you could speculate, and if I'm going to ask anyone, I would ask you, what do you think this might mean for daily living? how would it impact human beings on a daily level? What would it do better? Would it make life, it would work easier? Would we be able to communicate with each other better and more? Would we learn more? And I'm not just talking about students writing term papers, okay. But you mentioned and you emphasized humans created this.
Mm-hmm.
To what benefit would humans derive? Speculate all you, I know you don't have the answers.
Yeah, no, I mean,
But after all, it's there.
Yeah, no, I mean, so some things have gotten better. Communications, I mean, we talk about, I don't remember what the numbers now, but, you know, when this started, we maybe remember the numbers, but, you know, going from 14K modems to 500, 800 gig a second, you know, communicate, like, it's gotten more expensive for telecom companies to figure out how much use you get than when we made our first phone call. Long distance was charged by the minute. So communications have gotten better, you know, for sure, you know, both locally and globally, and that can help reduce some suspicion. In terms of just information access, I mean, some of the, you know, YouTube, for example, right? We're sharing ideas globally now, and some more practical things like, you know, Khan Academy is quite great, or you mentioned I teach part-time for Harvard Extension School. I have students all around the world, and that would not be possible without sort of the, you know, the internet. Other things, you know, on the positive thing, you know, with AI, some of the promises on the booming side is, you know, either looking at, you know, testing prescription drugs against certain things. Decoding the genome for COVID-19, I think, took 10 days. And then developing, so that wouldn't have been possible. I mean, it would go back to, you know, when does germ theory is only 100 and something years ago. And so it's an incredible tool. You know, the downside, you know, you mentioned sort of climate change. I mean, I don't think the Bitcoin industry has sort of like reconciled how much power and energy and CO2 emissions are created to create something that actually isn't a currency. And so it creates, you know, some harm too, you know, on all the data usage. Entertainment's gotten better. I think, you know, that could be good or bad. You know, again, I'm a professor, I like reading, and we just wrote a book, and I want people to read books, but maybe things will change. I mean, we're fundamentally sort of oral tradition sort of creatures, and so maybe it is audiobook, you know, is something to kind of work on. I don't know. Those were, you know, I think communications probably the main thing, because it started, it's a communication tool, the internet, and then it's become all of these other things to revolutionize. Not all good, but.
Right, the inventors of the internet. I know Bob Kahn, who was one of the fathers of the internet. He moved from a Boston-based company, Bolt, Oranek, and Newman, to the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, a branch of the Department of Defense, to implement the first packet-based switching network, which was called, what was it called?
TCP/IP.
Thank you. So ARPANET, but ARPANET became the internet. And did he anticipate social environments? I don't think so. I don't think any of the people associated could predict how it would be used. What I will say is that artificial intelligence does simplify, automate tasks that otherwise non-experts would not be able to implement. I have a son who's a CEO of a small company in Cambridge, and his company has adopted AI to edit videos. So, you know, you produce a video, they produce a transcript for you. AI is being used to translate audio into text. You want to edit this, you know, for example, I went on a podcast with Derek on a television show, White House Chronicle, mentioned the federal, what I said was Electric Reliability Corporation, and I was corrected. It's the Federal Energy Reliability Corporation, FERC, F-E-R-C. And later, they manually, because said it correctly later, they manually made that change in the video. It's seamless. Well, my son's company is doing this automatically, so you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to have a video editor, a human, there to do this for you. So there are going to be lots and lots of applications that are going to become more efficient, seamless. There'll be functionality. For example, if you can produce videos at home and edit them, it's going to give you a lot of pleasure, I think. So a lot of because it's hard to predict the future, as a famous baseball player said, you know, prediction, that's Yogi Berra. He said, making predictions is difficult, especially of the future.
Yeah.
We've got time for one more question. We'll go to closing thoughts there.
Dave. Yeah, okay.
We'll do two more.
Two more.
Thank you. At the beginning, we heard a brief mention about the initial Rhode Island cybersecurity initiative, and we later heard about the NSA working with the corporate world. In terms of protecting local infrastructure within the state, I'm thinking about public energy utility, transportation, medical. Could you say something about the relationship between the federal government, the NSA, and state government? Whose responsibility is it?
Yeah, so state, like in those cases, state government regulating those companies. Typically up at the federal level, banking is federal, telecom, federal, but in terms of hospitals, roads, rail infrastructure, state level regulation, and even protecting themselves. I mean, I think partly, if I remember back, because it was about a decade ago, the commission was sort of interested in a few things. One of them was just securing state government. So you could get a driver's license or pay your taxes, get a wedding, marriage license and birth certificates and that kind of stuff. Just secure secure the state institutions. And then another was, about workforce development to ensure. I mean, what I liked, and I sort of lost track, but there was an initiative, Computer Science for RI, and the goal was K through 12 education. Every year there would be some form of computer science education. I know the Community College of Rhode Island has sort of cybersecurity program scholarships to get more people in the industry and make Rhode Island sort of a center. But I would say it's largely self-help and, with some state regulatory oversight is probably the main answer, which isn't terribly satisfying. Hospitals are the biggest victim of ransomware, in the United States, because they have such a large attack surface, user group. They need their medical records, and then they have to pay, and so that's the unfortunate aspect, of that. In spite of all these things done, I mean, I think the one, a lot of things I like about the book, but security is a cat and mouse game, and I've got at least what I like is a wonderful graphic. Just in terms of every couple years, some new organization is created, but there's some new extraordinary hack, right, that occurs, and so clearly things are not keeping up. A lot of incentives to just kind of keep pushing in these spaces. So.
Yeah, that's I guess the cyber threat landscape, and how I look at it is you have the .mil network, the .gov network, the .com network, and you have U.S. Cyber Command that defends the .mil network. You have CISA that is supposed to be in charge of